The voice started before the signal ever did. Ethan Cole hadn't slept a full night in almost 11 years. Not since that whisper first carved its way into his dreams, soft and distant like it was traveling across miles of empty space, repeating the same words over and over until they burned into his bones. I'm still waiting. Tonight, it was louder. Not in his head, but in the air itself. The cold bit through his suit as he stepped out onto the frozen plain, boots crunching over a thin crust of crystalline frost that shimmered under twin moons. His scanner flickered at his wrist, numbers stuttering like they couldn't decide what reality they were in, temperature dropping past -40 degrees, then spiking, then dropping again. Yeah, that's new, he muttered, breath fogging inside his visor as he turned toward the source of the anomaly. About 200 yards ahead, the ice wasn't just reflecting light, it was emitting it, a faint blue glow pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the surface. His salvage instincts told him to mark it, log it, sell the coordinates, and walk away. Easy money. No risk. No more sleepless nights chasing ghosts. But the voice came again, closer now, almost trembling. I'm still waiting. His jaw tightened. Yeah, well, so am I, he whispered back, not even sure who he was talking to anymore. He moved forward anyway. The ground beneath his boots shifted from solid frost to something smoother, almost glass-like, as if the planet itself had been melted and reshaped around whatever lay buried here. His scanner flatlined. No readings. No signals. Just silence. That should have been enough to make him turn around. Instead, he knelt. The glow beneath the surface intensified as his gloved hand hovered inches above it, warmth radiating up through layers of insulated fabric, impossible on a world like this. His pulse quickened, loud in his ears, matching the rhythm beneath the ice. He hesitated for half a second, just enough time for a warning to flash across his HUD, unidentified structure. Do not interfere. Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah, I've never been great at following orders. His fingers pressed down. The ice didn't crack. It dissolved. Light spilled upward in a silent surge, and suddenly she was there, suspended in a crystalline chamber that had no seams, no edges, like time itself had been holding its breath around her. Her skin glowed. A soft, luminous blue, faint lines of light tracing along her arms like veins made of starlight, her hair drifting weightlessly as if gravity had forgotten her, and on her face, frozen tears, caught mid-fall, shining like tiny constellations. Ethan froze. Every instinct, every bit of training, every rational thought told him to step back, to seal this place and call it in. Instead, he leaned closer. Hey, he said quietly, voice rough from disuse. You alive in there? The chamber responded before she did. A low hum vibrated through the ground, rising into a tone that resonated in his chest, in his teeth, in the back of his skull, like something ancient recognizing him. The light intensified. The tears on her face trembled. And then, her eyes opened. Bright. A deep, impossible gold that locked onto his like she had been searching for nothing else. Her lips parted, breath fogging the inside of the chamber for the first time in who knew how long. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't distant anymore. It was right there. Shaking. Real. Human. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Because he knew that voice. He had heard it in the dark for years. In every restless night. In every moment of silence he couldn't escape. And now it was looking straight at him. Her hand lifted slowly, pressing against the inside of the crystalline barrier, exactly where his hand rested on the outside. A perfect alignment. A perfect match. I've waited for you, she whispered, tears finally breaking free, sliding down her glowing skin. For years. His breath caught. His mind raced. Because every sensor he had, every piece of tech strapped to his body, every logical system he trusted, was screaming the same thing. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't the one she was waiting for. And yet, she was looking at him like he was the only thing in the universe that had ever mattered. The moment her fingers aligned with his through the barrier, the entire structure pulsed like it had just remembered how to breathe, and Ethan felt the vibration travel up his arm, past the suit, past the insulation, straight into his chest, sinking with his heartbeat in a way that made his stomach tighten, because nothing in his training had ever prepared him for something that felt alive. He swallowed hard and forced his voice. Steady. Okay. Okay. You are real. That is new. That is definitely new. But his humor landed flat even to his own ears as her golden eyes studied him with an intensity that was not curiosity, not fear, but recognition, like she was confirming something she had already known for years. You came, she whispered, her voice trembling again, softer now, like each word cost her something. And Ethan shook his head instinctively, backing half an inch away even though his hand did not fully leave the surface. No, no, hold on. I did not come for anyone. I was just scanning salvage routes. I do not even know what this place is. His gaze flicked to his dead scanner. Still blank, still useless. And I definitely do not know you. But even as he said it, something in his chest twisted, because that was not entirely true. He did know her voice. He had known it for years. In the quiet moments when space felt too big and too empty, her expression shifted, not in anger, not in disappointment, but in something quieter, something deeper, as if she was adjusting to a reality she had not expected. You do not remember, she said, more to herself than to him, and Ethan frowned, stepping closer again despite every warning sign screaming in the back of his mind. Remember what? He asked, and this time his voice was lower, more careful, because whatever this was, it was not just some frozen artifact waiting to be sold. The chamber responded again, the light dimming and brightening in slow waves, and faint symbols began to ripple across its surface, not carved, not projected, but existing, as if the material itself was thinking. And then his suit chirped weakly, a partial reboot forcing a single line of data onto his display. Temporal displacement field detected. Ethan blinked. That is not a thing, he muttered, but the words felt hollow as he looked back at her. Because she did not look confused by any of it. She looked tired, like someone who had been holding onto a single thread for far too long. I called across time, she said slowly, each word deliberate. Again, and again, and again, until you answered. Her hand pressed more firmly against the barrier, and for a split second, the surface between them flickered, turning almost transparent, close enough that he could see the faint rise and fall of her breath. The tiny tremor in her fingers. You always answered, she added, and that was when his chest tightened for a completely different reason, because he had not answered anything. He had only endured those dreams, those whispers that never stopped. Listen, he said, shaking his head more firmly now, grounding himself in the cold, in the numbers, in anything real. I think you have the wrong guy. I am not some chosen anything. I fix broken ships and sell parts for a living. That is it. He gestured vaguely around them. I do not do destiny. But the moment the word left his mouth, the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the world itself had reacted. Her eyes softened, and there was something almost sad in the way she looked at him now. That is why it is you, she said, and before he could respond, before he could even process what that meant, the horizon behind him lit up with streaks of fire cutting through the sky, distant but fast, too fast, and his suit alarms finally came back to life all at once, blaring warnings about incoming vessels, unknown signatures, rapid descent trajectories. Ethan turned sharply, heart spiking. You have got to be kidding me, he breathed, watching as at least 3 ships broke through the upper atmosphere, their silhouettes sharp against the twin moons, heading straight for his position. Behind him, the chamber pulsed harder, brighter, as if reacting to the same threat. And her voice came again, quieter now, almost fragile. They found me, she said. And then, after a pause that felt heavier than anything else in that frozen world, they must not find you. The sky should not have moved that fast, and yet the streaks of light were already cutting through the clouds, turning the frozen horizon into something alive and watching. And Ethan felt it in his gut before his systems could even process it. That instinctive tightening that said this was no longer salvage, no longer curiosity. This was a situation he was not equipped to handle. Yeah, that is definitely not standard traffic, he muttered, taking a step back from the chamber, his boots crunching sharply against the glass-like surface as his eyes tracked the descending ships, each one adjusting course with precise, deliberate intent, all of them converging on a single point. Behind him, the chamber pulsed harder, the blue light intensifying until it cast long, shifting shadows across the ice. And her voice came again, steadier now despite the fear threaded through it. "You have to leave," she said. And there was no hesitation in it. No pleading, just a quiet certainty that made him turn back toward her. "Not happening," Ethan replied immediately, the words coming out before he had time to think them through, because something about the way she said it, like she had already accepted being left behind, hit a part of him he did not like ignoring. He ran a hand through his hair under the helmet, pacing once, twice, his mind racing through options that all ended the same way. Badly. "Those things up there are not here for sightseeing. And you are telling me they are looking for you, which means if I walk away right now, they still get what they came for." He gestured toward the chamber. "And I get to live with that." He let out a short breath, shaking his head. "Yeah. No. I am already not sleeping. I do not need that added to the list." Her eyes searched his face, something shifting in them again, softer this time, almost disbelieving. "You would stay?" she asked, like the concept itself did not make sense, and Ethan gave a small, humorless smile. "I would complain about it the entire time, but yeah, I would stay." The chamber flickered at that, the barrier between them thinning for a fraction of a second before stabilizing again, and his suit pinged with a new warning. Closer now, much closer, the ships breaking through the last layer of atmosphere, their engines humming in a frequency that vibrated through the ground. "Okay," he said, turning back toward the sky. "New plan. We get you out of there. We find somewhere not directly under incoming traffic, and then we figure out why the universe thinks I am part of this mess." He stepped forward again, placing both hands against the surface, ignoring the way the warmth surged up his arms. "So how do I open this thing without accidentally turning you into a cautionary tale?" But she did not answer right away, her gaze dropping briefly to where his hands met the barrier, then lifting back to his eyes with something that looked almost like fear, but not for herself. "If you open it," she said slowly, "they will feel it." Ethan blinked. Feel what? And this time her hand pressed harder against the inside, the light between them flaring brighter. "Me and you," she said, and for a moment, neither of them moved, the implication settling in the space between them, heavier than the cold, heavier than the approaching ships. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the visor again as he glanced once more at the sky, at the descending lights that were no longer distant, no longer abstract, but real and closing fast, and then back at her, at the way she looked at him like he mattered more than the risk, more than the outcome. "Yeah," he said quietly, almost to himself. "That tracks." His fingers tightened slightly against the surface. "I never picked the easy option." And then he looked straight at her, steady, certain despite everything. "Tell me what to do." The ships were no longer distant streaks of light, but defined shapes now. Angular silhouettes slicing through the upper atmosphere with controlled precision, their descent slowing as if they were savoring the approach, and Ethan could feel the low-frequency hum building in the air, vibrating through the soles of his boots and up into his bones. He did not look away this time, did not pretend this was anything less than what it was, a countdown, and he turned back to her with a steadiness that surprised even him. "You said they will feel it if I open this, so that means right now. They do not know exactly where you are," he said, thinking out loud, piecing it together as his mind shifted from confusion to something more focused, more deliberate. She nodded once, slow, careful. "They know I am here, but not where." Her voice was quieter now, controlled, like she was holding herself together through sheer will. "The field hides me, but it is failing." Ethan glanced at the chamber again, at the flickering light, at the way the surface rippled in uneven pulses, and for the first time he noticed the imperfections, the subtle fractures in something that had once been perfect. "Of course it is," he muttered, "because that would be too easy." He ran a hand across the surface again, slower this time, feeling for anything, any pattern, any response, and the moment his palms settled flat against it, the light beneath his skin surged, brighter than before, reacting not just to contact but to him specifically. Her breath caught softly on the other side, and she stepped closer within the chamber, mirroring his movement without thinking. "It responds to you," she said, almost in disbelief, and Ethan let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Yeah, well, I am starting to get real tired of hearing that." But he did not pull away, Instead, he leaned in slightly, studying the shifting symbols that moved beneath the surface, patterns forming and dissolving too quickly for his eyes to fully track, yet somehow familiar, like something his mind almost understood but could not quite reach. The ships above adjusted again, their positions tightening, the hum growing sharper, and his suit flashed a new alert. Distance, 2 miles and closing. ETA. Less than 3 minutes. Okay, Ethan said, voice lower now, urgency threading through it. We do not have time to debate destiny or whatever this is. So you are going to walk me through this like I am an idiot, which is not far off right now. He met her eyes again, steady, grounded. How do I open it without lighting us both up like a beacon? She hesitated, and for the first time since he had seen her, uncertainty fully broke through her composure. Not fear for herself, but something heavier, something tied to him. It requires a bond, she said slowly, choosing each word with care. Not force, not code, connection. Ethan blinked. Connection, he repeated, and she nodded, her hand lifting again, pressing against the barrier where his remained, the light between them intensifying until it almost blurred the space. It was designed to respond to the one who would find me, not by power, but by choice. Her voice softened on that last word, and something in Ethan's chest tightened again. That same uncomfortable pull that had been growing since the moment he heard her speak. You keep saying that like it makes sense, he said quietly, but he did not move his hand, did not break the contact, even as the heat spread further up his arm, not burning, not painful, but overwhelming in a way he could not quite define. The symbols beneath his palm began to slow, their chaotic movements settling into a pattern, aligning, syncing with the rhythm of his heartbeat, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just that, the steady pulse, the warmth, the presence of her hand just inches away on the other side. Above them, the first of the ships broke through the cloud layer, its surface reflecting the cold light of the moons as it angled downward, precise, inevitable. Ethan exhaled slowly, his voice barely more than a breath now. All right, connection it is. His fingers spread slightly against the surface, grounding himself in that point of contact, in that shared space between them. Just do not let me mess this up. And on the other side, her expression shifted again, something softer, something certain, as she whispered, you already chose not to leave. That is enough. The moment Ethan let himself stop thinking and just feel, the chamber reacted like it had been waiting for that exact shift, the light beneath his hand stabilizing into a steady glow instead of erratic pulses, and the warmth that had been spreading up his arm deepened into something more precise, more focused, like a current finding its path. He inhaled slowly, steadying his breathing, matching it to the rhythm he felt through the surface. And for the first time since all of this began, the noise in his head quieted. No calculations, no escape routes, just the simple awareness of her presence on the other side, close enough that he could almost imagine the barrier was not there at all. Like this? He asked, his voice low, careful not to break whatever fragile alignment had formed, and she nodded gently, her golden eyes never leaving his. Do not force it, she said softly. Just stay. And something about that word settled deeper than it should have, because staying had never been his strength, not in places, not with people, not with anything that might ask something from him. The symbols beneath his palm slowed further, each one beginning to align with the next, forming patterns that no longer felt chaotic but intentional, like language instead of noise, and though he could not read them, he understood their direction, their purpose, as if they were guiding his own heartbeat into synchronization with the system. Above them, the ships descended lower, their outlines now fully visible, sleek structures hovering against the dark sky, and his suit flashed another warning. Distance, 1 mile. And closing. But the urgency felt distant compared to what was happening between his hand and hers. This is insane, he murmured, but there was no panic in it now, only a quiet disbelief, and she tilted her head slightly, a faint trace of something warmer crossing her expression. So am I, she replied, and for a brief moment, despite everything, he almost smiled. The barrier flickered again, thinner this time, not unstable but transitioning, and a faint sensation brushed against his skin, not physical, not quite, but close enough to make his breath catch, like the memory of touch rather than the thing itself. "Do you feel that?" he asked, and her eyes softened further. "Yes," she whispered. "That is the connection." And as she said it, the last of the symbols beneath his hand locked into place with a subtle shift, a quiet finality that resonated through the chamber and into the ground beneath them. Ethan felt it immediately. A change in pressure, in presence, like a door that had been sealed for years finally recognizing it could open. The surface between them became almost completely transparent now, the glow receding just enough for him to see her clearly. Every detail, the faint shimmer of her skin, the way her breath moved, the tears that still traced down her cheeks but no longer fell with the same weight. "I think it is working," he said, barely above a whisper, afraid that saying it too loudly might somehow undo it. And she nodded, stepping closer until there was nothing between them but a thin veil of light. Above, one of the ships shifted position, lowering further, its presence now casting a moving shadow across the ice, and his suit alarm spiked again. Less than 60 seconds, but he did not look away from her. "When this opens," she said gently, "everything will change." And there was no warning in her tone, no attempt to stop him, just a simple truth. Ethan exhaled slowly, his fingers still pressed firmly against the surface, grounded in that shared point between them. "Yeah," he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation now. "That seems to be a theme lately." And then the barrier responded, not with force, not with sound, but with a soft, almost imperceptible shift, like ice turning to water, like time deciding to move again, and for the first time, there was nothing between his hand and hers at all. The instant their hands met without the barrier, the world did not explode or shatter like Ethan half expected. It simply changed, a quiet shift that moved through him like a second heartbeat, warm and steady and impossibly calm. And for a brief second, everything else faded, the cold, the ships, the alarms, all of it slipping into the background as his gloved hand closed instinctively around hers. Her skin was warmer than anything on this frozen world, not just in temperature, but in presence. Like holding something alive in a way he had forgotten was possible, and she inhaled sharply, her eyes widening as if the contact itself was something new to her as well. "You are real," she whispered, and there was a fragile wonder in her voice that made his chest tighten in a way he could not explain. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly, his voice softer now, stripped of the usual edge. "So are you." And for a moment, neither of them moved, both of them suspended in that shared realization, in that quiet confirmation that whatever this connection was, it was not one-sided. The chamber behind her dissolved completely with a soft shimmer, the remaining light folding inward like it had completed its purpose, leaving only open air between them, and a faint gust of cold wind swept through the space, reminding him abruptly that time had not stopped, that the world outside was still very much in motion. His suit alarms surged back to full volume. Distance, half a mile, multiple vessels locking position, and he flinched slightly, reality snapping back into place as he turned his head toward the sky, where the ships now hovered low enough to cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. "Okay. Yeah, that is our cue to move," he said, reluctantly loosening his grip on her hand before quickly taking it again, more firmly this time, guiding rather than just holding. "Can you walk?" he asked, already scanning the terrain for any kind of cover, any structure, anything that was not an open, frozen plain. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her gaze dropping briefly to their joined hands before she nodded. "Yes," she said, though there was a faint unsteadiness in her stance as she took her first step forward, like someone relearning how to exist outside of stillness. Ethan adjusted immediately, shifting closer, not pulling but supporting, matching his pace to hers without thinking. "Easy," he murmured, more instinct than intention, and she glanced up at him, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Not weakness, not exactly, but something softer, something that did not quite belong in a world that sent ships across the sky to retrieve her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, the question quiet but direct, and Ethan let out a short breath, eyes still scanning the horizon as he guided them toward a low ridge of fractured ice about 50 yards away. "Honestly, I am still figuring that out," he admitted, But leaving you here did not feel like an option. He glanced at her briefly, offering a small, almost apologetic shrug. And I have learned the hard way that when something feels that clear, you probably should not ignore it. Her grip tightened slightly in response, subtle but unmistakable, and she looked ahead again, her voice softer now. That is why I waited, she said, and before he could respond, the nearest ship shifted position again, a beam of pale light sweeping across the surface in a slow, searching motion that passed just behind them, close enough that Ethan felt the air temperature spike for a split second. His pulse kicked up, focus sharpening instantly. Yeah, we are definitely out of time, he said, quickening their pace just slightly, careful not to pull her off balance. We get to that ridge, we stay low, and we figure out what comes next. But even as he said it, he knew this was no longer just about getting away, no longer just about survival. Because the moment their hands had touched, something had already changed, something that made this feel less like an accident and more like the beginning of something he did not yet understand. And as he glanced at her again, at the way she moved beside him, no longer alone, no longer frozen in time, he realized with a quiet certainty that whatever came next, walking away was no longer one of the options. The ridge was closer than it looked, but every step across the glassy surface felt louder than it should have, each crunch echoing in the open air like it was announcing their position, and Ethan kept his head low, eyes flicking between the terrain ahead and the shifting light above, calculating angles, timing, distance, anything that could buy them a few more seconds. Stay close, he murmured, his voice steady even as his pulse pushed harder against his ribs, and her hand remained in his without hesitation now, no longer uncertain, no longer tentative, but anchored, as if letting go was no longer an option for either of them. The beam from the nearest ship swept across the ground again, slower this time, more deliberate, the pale light stretching across the frozen plain in long arcs that seemed to linger just a second too long in each place. And Ethan adjusted their path instinctively, angling slightly to the left, using the uneven fractures in the ice as partial cover, small ridges that broke up their outline just enough to matter. They are searching for patterns, she said quietly beside him, her voice calm despite the urgency in the air, and he glanced at her briefly. Patterns, he repeated, and she nodded, her gaze fixed on the moving light above. Movement, heat, anything that repeats. Ethan let out a short breath. Great. So basically everything we are doing. But even as he said it, his pace shifted again, less linear now, more irregular, small adjustments that broke rhythm without slowing them down too much. Instincts honed from years of moving through places that did not want to be found. They reached the edge of the ridge just as the beam passed behind them again, and Ethan guided her down into the shallow depression on the other side. The ice here broken into jagged layers that rose just high enough to shield them from direct view. He crouched immediately, pulling her down with him, their shoulders brushing as they pressed into the narrow space. The cold biting sharper here, where the wind funneled through the cracks. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both listening, both feeling the hum of the ships above, closer now, heavier, like a presence that filled the sky. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing to even out as he glanced up through a narrow gap between the fractured ice, catching glimpses of the underside of one of the vessels as it hovered overhead, its surface smooth and reflective, almost organic in the way it moved. Okay, he whispered, more to himself than to her. We have maybe a minute before they narrow it down to this area. He shifted slightly, turning toward her, his voice dropping even lower. You said they can feel you when the chamber opens, so right now, they know you are somewhere here, but not exactly where. She nodded, her expression composed, but her eyes sharper now, more focused. Yes, she said, but that will not last. Ethan gave a small, tight nod. Yeah, figured. He ran a hand briefly over his face, thinking, recalculating, the usual options not fitting this situation at all, because this was not just about hiding. This was about something much bigger than him. There is something else, she added quietly, and he looked at her again, catching the slight hesitation in her voice. The connection we formed, it is not hidden from them, his brow furrowed. Meaning, and she held his gaze, steady, unflinching. They can sense that I am no longer alone. The words settled between them with a weight that was impossible to ignore, and for a brief second, Ethan just stared at her, processing, before letting out a quiet, almost disbelieving exhale. So not only did I get involved, I also made us easier to track. He shook his head slightly, a faint, ironic smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the situation. Yeah, that sounds about right. But there was no regret in it. Not really, just acknowledgement. Above them, the beam shifted again, narrowing this time, focusing more tightly on the area around the ridge, and Ethan's expression hardened slightly, focus snapping back into place. All right, he said quietly, his tone changing, more decisive now. Then hiding is not going to cut it. He met her eyes again, steady, certain despite everything. We need to move before they lock onto us completely. Her gaze searched his face for a brief moment, as if measuring something deeper than his words, and then she nodded once, trust without hesitation. Ethan took a slow breath, then shifted forward slightly, preparing to move again, his hand finding hers without looking, grounding himself in that connection that had already changed everything. And as the light above narrowed further, closing in, he realized this was no longer about avoiding them. It was about staying one step ahead of something that had already started to notice they were there together. The moment Ethan shifted forward to move, the air changed. Again, not in temperature but in pressure, like the space around them had suddenly become aware, and he froze instinctively, one hand tightening around hers as his eyes snapped upward through the narrow gap in the ridge. The beam above had stopped sweeping, no longer drifting across the terrain in wide arcs, but holding steady, locked in place just beyond their cover, and his stomach dropped slightly as he realized what that meant. Yeah, that is not good, he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the low hum that now felt closer, heavier, like it was pressing down on them. Beside him, she did not move, but he felt the subtle shift in her posture, the way her fingers tightened around his, not in panic, but in recognition. They are focusing, she said quietly, her eyes lifting toward the same narrow opening. They feel the connection more clearly now. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm, to think, because panic would only make them predictable, and predictable was exactly what those things were designed to find. Okay, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then we stop being predictable. His gaze dropped to the fractured ice around them, scanning quickly, mapping the terrain in his head, every ridge, every dip, every reflective surface that could either hide them or give them away. When I move, do not follow right away, he said suddenly, turning to her, his voice low but firm, and she looked at him immediately, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Why? She asked, and Ethan gave a small, tight smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Because right now, they are tracking both of us together, so we break that pattern. He gestured slightly toward the ridge above. I move first, draw the attention. You wait, then move in a different direction. Her expression tightened slightly at that. Not fear, but resistance. That will separate us, she said, and there was something in her tone that made the words heavier than they should have been. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, steady, grounded. Only for a few seconds, he said quietly, long enough to confuse them. He paused, then added more softly, I am not going anywhere. The words settled between them, simple but certain, and after a brief moment, she nodded, trust overriding hesitation. Above them, the beam shifted again, narrowing further, inching closer to the ridge, and Ethan felt the window closing fast. All right, he whispered, taking one last breath as he slowly released her hand, the absence of her warmth immediate and sharper than he expected, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the movement ahead. 3 seconds, he said. Then without waiting any longer, he surged upward, clearing the edge of the ridge in one smooth motion and breaking into a sprint across the open surface, his boots striking the ice in uneven patterns, deliberately erratic, cutting sharp angles instead of running straight. The response was immediate, the beam snapping toward him like it had been waiting for exactly that, the light sweeping across his path, tracking, adjusting, and Ethan did not look back, did not slow, just kept moving, pulling the attention with him. Behind him, hidden by the ridge, she waited exactly as he had said, counting the seconds not by numbers, but by the fading echo of his footsteps. And when the moment came, she moved, not in the same direction, not in the same rhythm, but with a fluid precision that felt almost like flowing rather than running, her path cutting away from his, breaking the pattern completely. Above them, the ships hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, the beam flickering between two moving points instead of one, and Ethan felt it even without looking. That slight disruption in the rhythm of the search, and a small, breathless laugh escaped him despite everything. Yeah, that is it, he muttered, pushing himself faster as the light struggled to decide which signal to follow. But even as the plan worked, even as the pattern broke, something else shifted in the air, something deeper, something that did not rely on movement or heat or logic, and far above, one of the ships adjusted again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if something inside it had made a different kind of decision, and Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold as he realized that breaking the pattern had not made them invisible, it had simply made them more interesting. The moment the beam hesitated, Ethan felt it in his chest before he saw it, that subtle shift in pressure again, like something above had stopped relying on systems and started relying on something else entirely, and his stride faltered for half a step before he forced himself forward again, boots scraping sharply across the ice as he angled toward a cluster of jagged formations about 100 yards ahead. "Do not slow down," he muttered under his breath, even though no one could hear him, the words more for himself than anything else, because every instinct told him that whatever had just changed was not in their favor. Behind him, the light split, one beam still tracking his erratic movement, the other drifting, searching, as if trying to reconcile two conflicting signals. And for a moment, it worked, the confusion buying him distance, buying her time. But then the hum deepened, a low resonance that vibrated through the air in a way that made his teeth ache, and Ethan knew, without needing a warning from his suit, that something new had come online. "Yeah, there it is," he breathed, his voice tight now as he pushed harder, his path becoming less about misdirection and more about reaching cover before whatever that was locked in completely. He risked a glance back, just a fraction of a second, and what he saw made his stomach drop, because one of the ships had shifted position, not to follow him, not to follow her, but to hover directly above the space between them, as if it had realized that the answer was not in choosing one signal over the other, but in understanding the connection that tied them together. His pace slowed for just an instant, not from hesitation but from the realization, hitting him all at once. "It is not tracking us separately," he said under his breath, the words forming as the thought solidified. "It is tracking the link," and that changed everything. He skidded slightly as he reached the edge of the jagged formation, dropping low behind it, his breath coming faster now as he pressed himself into the cold surface, trying to steady his thoughts, trying to think past the instinct to just keep moving. "Okay, think," he whispered, eyes flicking upward again, tracking the ship that now hovered between their last known positions, its presence steady, patient, like it was no longer in a hurry because it already had what it needed. Somewhere out there, beyond his line of sight, she was moving too, following his plan, trusting him to make it work, and the weight of that settled heavier than anything else, because this was no longer just about escape. This was about the fact that their connection had made them visible in a way neither of them had expected. His hand tightened briefly against the ice, remembering the warmth of hers, the way the chamber had responded, the way everything had aligned the moment he chose to stay, and a sharp, almost bitter laugh escaped him under his breath. "Of course that is the problem," he murmured. "The one thing that actually worked is the one thing they can see." He shook his head slightly, exhaling as he forced himself to shift perspective, because if they could track the connection, then breaking it might hide them. But the thought hit him like a cold wave, sharp and immediate, because breaking it meant letting go, really letting go, and something in his chest resisted that instantly, instinctively. Above him, the beam adjusted again, slower now, more precise, narrowing toward the space between his position and hers, and Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, centering himself, pushing past the noise, past the fear, past the uncertainty, until only one thing remained clear, not logic, not strategy, but choice. "No," he said quietly, almost to himself, The word firm despite the doubt that tried to creep in. I am not doing that. He opened his eyes again, gaze sharpening as he looked toward where he knew she would be, even if he could not see her. And for the first time since this started, his next move was not about avoiding the ships, not about breaking patterns or hiding signals. It was about something far simpler and far more dangerous. He pushed himself up from behind the ridge, not running away this time, but turning slightly, angling his path back toward her instead of away, and as he moved, the beam reacted immediately, snapping toward him again. But this time, Ethan did not try to confuse it, did not try to break its pattern. He let it follow, because if the connection was what they were tracking, then he was done pretending it was something to hide. And as the light locked onto him, brighter now, more focused, he exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible as the hum above deepened. If they want to follow something, they can follow me. The beam locked onto him with a precision that felt almost personal, the pale light narrowing until it wrapped around his movement like a second shadow, and Ethan did not fight it this time, did not try to break the pattern or disappear. He leaned into it, letting it follow as he cut across the frozen terrain with deliberate intent. Every step felt heavier now, not from exhaustion but from the weight of the choice he had just made. Because this was no longer about getting away, this was about pulling something dangerous in a different direction, away from her. Come on, he muttered under his breath, voice steady despite the tension tightening his chest. You wanted a signal. Here I am. And above him, the ship responded, its position adjusting subtly, not rushing, not reacting like it had before, but observing, tracking, learning. The hum deepened again, a layered resonance that seemed to press against his thoughts, and for a split second, his vision blurred at the edges, not from the cold, not from the effort, but from something else, something reaching, and he clenched his jaw, forcing himself forward, grounding himself in movement, in the rhythm of his steps, in anything that was his. Somewhere behind him, beyond the fractured ridges and shifting light, she would feel this too. He knew it without needing to see her, the connection between them still there, still alive, still impossible to ignore. And the thought flickered through his mind that she might try to follow, might try to close the distance again. Do not, he whispered under his breath, not sure if she could hear him, not sure if the connection worked that way, but hoping it did, hoping she understood what he was trying to do. The terrain shifted ahead, the smooth ice breaking into uneven plates that rose and dipped in jagged layers, and Ethan adjusted his path without slowing, using the elevation to keep moving, to stay unpredictable even as the beam tracked him perfectly. Above, one of the other ships began to move as well, slower than the first, angling to intercept rather than follow, and Ethan's focus sharpened instantly, his route changing again, cutting wider now, pulling them further from the ridge where she had been, further from the last place they had shared space. That is right, he said quietly, breath steady despite the strain. You follow me, not her, and for a moment, it worked, the secondary ship adjusting its path, drawn toward his trajectory instead of the empty space behind him. But the hum did not fade, it intensified, layering into something deeper, something more focused, and Ethan felt it again, that pressure against his thoughts, like something was trying to understand him, not just track him, but interpret him. He stumbled slightly as a wave of that sensation passed through him, not pain, not exactly, but overwhelming in a way that made his breath hitch, and he slowed for half a step before forcing himself forward again. No, he said under his breath, firmer now, pushing back against the intrusion with nothing but will, with nothing but the simple, stubborn refusal to let anything else decide what he did next. The beam brightened slightly in response, tightening its focus, and the ship above adjusted again, its position now directly overhead, matching his movement with perfect alignment. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound steady despite everything, and he did not look up this time, did not acknowledge the presence above him, because acknowledging it felt like giving it something it wanted. Instead, he focused on the horizon ahead, on the distant line where the frozen plain met the darker edge of broken terrain, and he kept moving, one step after another, each one a choice, each one a statement, and somewhere behind him, beyond the light and the hum and the cold, he knew she was still there, still connected, still part of this. And for the first time since the ships appeared, he allowed himself to think one step further ahead, beyond survival, beyond escape, to something else entirely, something quieter but stronger, because if they could track the connection, then maybe, just maybe, the connection could do more than just reveal them. It could guide them. And as that thought settled into place, Ethan's path shifted again, not random this time, not reactive, but intentional, angled toward something he could not yet see but somehow felt, and the beam followed without hesitation, exactly as he needed it to. The direction did not come from the terrain, and it did not come from the ships. It came from somewhere quieter, somewhere inside the space between his thoughts, like a faint pull that did not force him but invited him, and Ethan followed it without fully understanding why, his steps adjusting in subtle increments that felt less like decisions and more like alignment. The beam above tracked him perfectly, its light steady and unblinking, but for the first time since it locked onto him, it no longer felt like a threat chasing him. It felt like something he was leading. Yeah, that is new, he murmured under his breath, his voice steady despite the strange calm settling into his chest. Because the pressure that had been pushing against his thoughts had changed, it was still there, still present, but no longer probing, no longer invasive, more attentive, like it was waiting for something. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the rhythm of his movement. But his mind was no longer racing through escape routes. It was focused on that pull, that quiet sense of direction that seemed to be guiding him towards something just beyond his sight, behind him, far enough now that he could not see her, but close enough that he could still feel her presence through the connection. There was a shift, subtle but unmistakable, like a second heartbeat syncing with his own, and for a moment, he slowed slightly, not enough to break his pace but enough to acknowledge it. You feel it too, he said quietly, not expecting an answer, but the connection responded anyway, not in words, not in sound, but in a shared awareness that confirmed it. She was still there, still moving, still choosing to stay with him even as he pulled the danger away. The terrain ahead darkened, the smooth ice giving way to fractured rock that rose in uneven spires, casting deeper shadows that broke up the light from above, and Ethan angled toward it without hesitation, because whatever was guiding him was leading him there. The hum shifted again, not louder this time, but more focused, as if the ships had adjusted their understanding, and one of them moved ahead of him, not to intercept, not to block, but to observe from a different angle, its presence now less reactive and more deliberate. You are learning, Ethan said under his breath, a faint edge of something almost amused threading through his tone despite everything. That makes two of us. And as he said it, the pull in his chest strengthened, not sharply but steadily, drawing him deeper into the fractured terrain where the light struggled to reach and clean lines. He slowed as he entered the shadows, his steps quieter now, more controlled, and for the first time since this began, the beam above flickered slightly, its focus disrupted by the uneven surfaces, the broken reflections scattering its precision just enough to matter. Ethan paused for half a second, just long enough to feel the shift, to recognize the advantage, and then he moved again, not running now, but navigating, weaving through the jagged formations with a purpose that was no longer driven by fear but by understanding. Behind him, the connection pulsed again, stronger this time, and with it came something new, not just presence, not just awareness, but intention, and he realized with a quiet certainty that she was no longer just following him, she was moving with him. Good, he whispered, a small, almost relieved breath escaping him as the realization settled, because this was no longer one person running and another hiding. This was something else entirely, something coordinated without words, without planning, built entirely on the fact that neither of them had chosen to walk away. Above them, the ships adjusted again, their formation shifting as they recalibrated, but the hesitation remained, that fraction of uncertainty that had not been there before, and Ethan felt it, not as a weakness but as an opening. He moved deeper into the fractured terrain, the shadows closing around him, the light above struggling to follow cleanly, and as the pull in his chest guided him further in, he realized that whatever this connection was, it was no longer just something that made them visible. It was something that could lead them somewhere the ships could not fully see. And for the first time since this began, The possibility of not just escaping, but outmaneuvering something far more powerful than him, felt real enough to follow. The deeper Ethan moved into the fractured terrain, the more the world seemed to narrow around him. The wide open sky replaced by jagged silhouettes that cut the light into broken shards. And for the first time since the ships arrived, the hum above lost its clean, dominant tone, becoming uneven, scattered, like it was struggling to maintain the same level of control. He slowed slightly, not from hesitation but from awareness. Every step placed with intention now as he followed that quiet pull. Inside his chest, the one that no longer felt distant or uncertain but steady, guiding. "This is not random," he murmured under his breath, his voice low and thoughtful, because the path he was taking did not feel like escape. It felt like arrival. The connection pulsed again, stronger now, not just presence but clarity, and with it came something new. Not words, not exactly, but understanding, a shared sense of direction that did not need explanation. She was closer. Ethan stopped for half a second, his breath visible in the cold air. As he turned slightly, scanning the shadows between the jagged formations, and then he saw her, emerging from the darker edge of the terrain, her movement fluid despite the unfamiliar ground, her glowing blue skin softened by the fractured light around her. She did not slow when she reached him, did not hesitate. She simply stepped into his space as if it had always been hers to enter, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Their eyes met, and the connection between them shifted again, no longer stretched across distance but anchored, immediate, undeniable. "You came back," she said softly, and there was no accusation in it, no surprise, just quiet certainty, and Ethan let out a small breath, something almost like a laugh but softer, more grounded. "Yeah," he replied. "Turns out running away was not really working for me." Her gaze held his for a moment longer, and then she nodded slightly, as if that answer made perfect sense to her. Above them, the ships adjusted again, their positions shifting as they recalibrated, but the hesitation remained, the fractured terrain disrupting their precision just enough to matter, and Ethan glanced upward briefly, then back at her, his focus sharpening again. "They are still tracking us," he said, his tone calm but direct, but not as cleanly as before. She followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "This place interferes with their systems," she said, then paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she seemed to sense something beyond what he could, but not completely. Ethan nodded once, absorbing that, then shifted his stance slightly, turning his body just enough to place himself between her and the open gaps in the terrain, not out of strategy, not entirely, but instinctively. "Then we use that," he said, his voice steady. "We stay where they cannot see clearly. We keep moving where they cannot predict." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then added more quietly, "And we do it together." The last words carried more weight than the plan itself, and she felt it. He could see it in the way her expression softened, in the way her hand moved slightly, not reaching but close enough that the intention was there. "Together," she echoed, and the words settled between them like something chosen rather than assumed. The connection pulsed again, stronger than before, and this time, it did not just guide him forward, it expanded, stretching outward into the terrain itself, as if whatever force had drawn them together was now revealing more, something hidden beneath the surface of this place. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly as he felt it, that subtle shift in awareness, like the ground beneath them was not just fractured rock, but something older, something intentional. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly, and she nodded immediately, her eyes scanning the terrain with a new kind of focus. "Yes," she said, "this place, it is not natural." Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze following hers, tracing the jagged formations, the way they seemed almost too structured in their randomness, and then the realization settled in, quiet but undeniable. "It is hiding something," he said, and as the words left his mouth, the pull in his chest strengthened again, sharper this time, more specific, pointing not just forward but downward, toward a narrow gap between two towering shards of darkened ice. Above them, one of the ships shifted again, its beam flickering as it tried to adjust to the changing conditions, but for the first time, Ethan did not look up, did not acknowledge it, because whatever they were searching for, whatever had drawn them here, was no longer in the sky. It was beneath their feet, and as he took a step toward that narrow opening, his voice dropped to a quiet certainty. We are not just running anymore. We are getting closer. The narrow gap between the towering shards did not look like an entrance. It looked like a fracture, a place where the world had split and never quite sealed again. But the moment Ethan stepped closer, the pull in his chest sharpened into certainty, and he knew without question that this was where they were meant to go. The air shifted as they approached, the cold losing its bite just enough to feel unnatural, like the temperature itself was being held in place rather than allowed to exist, and Ethan slowed, his senses sharpening as he glanced once over his shoulder at the fractured sky above, where the ships still hovered, their lights scattered and uncertain now, no longer dominant, but still searching. They cannot see us clearly here, he said quietly, more as confirmation than observation. And beside him, she nodded, her gaze fixed on the gap ahead. Not the way they did before, she replied, her voice calm, grounded, but there was something else in it now, something deeper, like recognition. Ethan turned back toward the opening, his breath steady as he stepped inside, the jagged walls closing around them just enough to block the last of the direct light from above. And the moment they crossed that threshold, the world changed again, not with sound, not with force, but with absence. The hum from the ships faded, not completely, but enough that it no longer filled the space. And for the first time since this began, there was silence, real silence, the kind that settled into the bones instead of pressing against them. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction as he looked around, the interior of the passage revealing itself in faint, ambient light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The surfaces smooth in places, fractured in others, but always intentional, as if this had not been formed by chance but by design. You were right, he said quietly, his voice almost reverent despite himself. This is not natural. She stepped forward beside him, her hand brushing lightly against the wall, and the surface responded with a faint shimmer, like it recognized her presence, and her expression softened in a way he had not seen before, not relief, not exactly, but familiarity. I know this place, she whispered, and Ethan's brow furrowed slightly as he turned toward her. From before, she added, her voice distant for a moment, like she was reaching back through something older than memory. Before I was placed in the chamber. The words settled heavily in the quiet space, and Ethan felt that same pull in his chest shift again, not guiding him forward now, but anchoring him here, like they had reached something important. He took another step deeper into the passage, his gaze tracing the subtle patterns etched into the walls, shapes that mirrored the symbols he had seen in the chamber, slower now, clearer, and for a brief moment, he could almost understand them, not as language, but as intention. What is this place? He asked quietly, and she looked at him, her golden eyes steady, certain in a way that cut through everything else. It is where the signal began, she said, and Ethan felt the weight of that immediately, the connection, the dreams, the voice that had followed him for years, all of it tracing back to this moment, to this place. Above them, beyond the narrow opening, one of the ships shifted again, its light brushing against the entrance but not penetrating fully, as if something here resisted it, not with force, but with quiet defiance. Ethan glanced back once, just to confirm it, just to see the boundary between where they had been and where they were now. And then he turned forward again, his focus settling entirely on the path ahead. So this is where you waited, he said softly, and she shook her head slightly, stepping closer, her voice just above a whisper. No, she said, her gaze locking with his, something deeper than certainty in her eyes now, something chosen. This is where I knew you would come. The words settled between them, not as prophecy, not as fate, but as something simpler, something quieter, and Ethan let out a slow breath, his expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with understanding. He looked at her for a moment longer, then back at the path ahead, and without hesitation, he took another step forward, not because he was following a signal, not because he was being guided, but because he was choosing to move. And as the silence closed around them and the light above faded further into the distance, one thought settled quietly into place, steady and unshaken. He had not been chosen by the stars. He had simply chosen not to walk away.